We're using my laptop.
Yeah, oh, you're using your laptop.
For some reason, the phone.
Okay, do we need this one?
No.
How about audio?
You want to use that?
Probably better high level. Yeah, so take it in.
As you push play, are you seeing it?
Yeah, it's being recorded. It's live. Well, they were doing it. You know, a lot of windows.
All good?
Well, that's too much. That's great.
Is it better?
That's it.
Darn, is there a way to do this so it doesn't go on screensaver? We want a screensaver.
That's not
You
gonna
might
get
sit
us.
up there and not.
Just like.
Oops.
Change settings, but.
I really get to see it.
Good to move around, yeah.
You're, it's like Thanksgiving, you're at the head of the table.
Are you interested? Where do you want me?
Right here.
Right here.
Hi, Monica. Nice to meet
Good to
you.
meet you. I got quite a backdrop.
Yeah.
Well, we're
Good,
trying
I
to
like
go
that.
high-tech. Just a quick note about the format. You were over in Chrome yesterday, so
Yeah.
we're not going to try to keep it with this questions. But we did solicit questions from readers. I think that I guess I told you that. So may not be all the things. Charles got a bunch of them. There were a lot of really thoughtful questions. And at the end, if we have some time, there are some other questions that we'll probably. But between them and us, we'll put things together and show some.
Okay, very good.
Everybody ready?
Nice to see you again. Yeah.
All right. Actually, I thought we'd start with a bit of an icebreaker question since it is football season. 4 years ago, you were an unknown running for political office, and you defeated 4 other well-known Republicans and did place on political offense. How would you assess your political defensive game 4 weeks out from this election?
Yeah, the defensive game. What I'd say is we've become more active on that front. And the real issue is to be open, there's been at least one huge lie out there in terms of special interest dollars, and my opponent talking about how I've cut K-12 state funding. And that had millions of dollars behind it. And again, I try to be very positive, and I still think I'm being positive, but enough is enough. It's not being negative, it's about getting the truth out to people. And the truth is during my time in office, we've increased state funding for K-12 by $1.1 billion over the last 3 years. And it's $1 billion higher in the year for the budget I just signed compared to the year before I took office. And that's significant increase, huge increases. And in fact, it's going to, in some ways, help a lot of those teachers that are going on TV to say how I cut it, to help them have a retirement, ironically.
Actually, that kind of just shuffled the order of our questions a little bit, because further down, I really want to know how you respond to claims of funding public education, which you've already addressed.
Yeah, no, what I'd say, Charlie, and this is where I am being strong about this, is people say they're competing claims, there's different ways you can look at it. There's not. There's numbers, and there are historical numbers, and the numbers support what I'm saying. In fact, the last cuts to state dollars for K-12 were when he was in the legislature. And under the prior administration, between that term of years, there were 2 or 3 years where those dollars were cut.
You have a per pupil amount.
Again, that's not the way. The question is state funding for K-12. We've increased state funding for K-12.
By how much?
By a significant one. Again, I gave you the numbers. It was $1.1 billion over the 3-year period and $1 billion higher for the current budget. Because again, the issue is the school districts actually decide where the money goes. in many cases. We provide resources, and one of the big areas we've helped with is their retirement costs, which is a liability to school districts. In fact, by not putting it per pupil, I've actually given more money to traditional public schools than they would have gotten if I would have done it that way, because a chunk of that money otherwise would have gone to charter schools. So I think it actually reinforces the fact I'm supportive of traditional public schools.
Okay. And you had mentioned, especially on the education, the amount of advertising out there.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's been a lot of outside spending, both in your race and in the Senate race. Most recently, the other day, college Republicans put out an ad that kind of compared you and your opponent to wedding dresses. And Time Magazine actually labeled that as sexist. The question is, should there be limits and greater transparency on political advertising by outside groups, and what would you suggest?
Yeah, we had nothing to do with that ad. In fact, I described it as dumb and offensive, and we've asked them to take it down. What they do is their choice, because again, we didn't know about it, we had nothing to do with it. But we've done what we could in terms of sharing my thoughts on it and actually asking them to remove it, because it isn't appropriate. With respect to the whole transparency thing, I mean, that's a giant discussion, because you really get into Citizens United, what's freedom of speech. It's really unfortunate. What I'd say is to see the negativity and the misrepresentations that take place and the lies that take place in the political world. It's really sad for our country. The way I describe it to people, and I do talk about this, is I'm trying to be a role model for setting a higher standard, because think about the worlds we live in. There are really 3 worlds at least. There are more. But think about your family life, your work life, and the political world. And think about what we accept, we take as acceptable, or we don't really stop in the political world, that if any of this behavior happened in our family, there'd be some really interesting kitchen table discussions going on. And that stuff wouldn't happen. In our work world, you'd be looking for a new job, because that would simply not be tolerated as acceptable behavior. And yet we put up with this, and this is unfortunately something we all did collectively as citizens. We dropped the bar of acceptable behavior and expectations far too low, and it's not good. And so one thing I've been proud of for the years I've been in office and when I was campaigning before, I've tried to be very diligent about relentless positive action, because I want to raise that bar in this political world, in fact. I mean, that's where I'm proud of. I've not blamed anyone for any of the problems I've had. I've focused on solving the problem. And isn't that the way it should be? Because again, what would happen in Washington if everyone would agree they're not going to blame or fight with one another? There'd be a whole lot of time left to solve problems. So that's been my model here, and I'm just trying to stick to those principles as best I can.
I'm going to toss a couple of questions that we crowdsourced from out there. One comes from Becky Ums, who brought up a fellow named Dr. Barrett Papa, who in the middle of this month was convicted of pled guilty to health care fraud. And her question actually has to do with LARA, licensing regulatory agency. She says the agency did not investigate complaints about him as far back as 2010. She wants to know, will you sign House Bills 5839 through 42 if they come to your desk? If you're not immediately familiar with those, they allow for permanent revocation of healthcare licenses and broaden the violations that could result in permanent revocation. So.
Well, obviously there's an issue that I'm happy to spend more time looking into. This is the first time I've had someone ask me about that particular doctor or those bills. So I can't tell you whether I'd sign them or not, because I want to analyze the entire bill. The concept of making sure we're reducing fraud, being hard on that, and being effective is important. So I clearly support that. What I can tell you is within the departments, we have increased fairly significantly over the last few years the amount of resources to look for fraud in both DHS and DCH, Community Health and Human Services, to really try to identify situations where fraud's going on and eliminate it. And I'd be happy to work with them and Laura in terms of following up on that particular comment.
And Jill Forsythe from Birmingham brings up 2 statewide proposals that are on the ballot for November, which have to do with wolf hunting. And basically, she says if Proposal 2 is not defeated on Election Day, the politically appointed Natural Resources Commission will have unprecedented power to name animals to the list of game species to be hunted without oversight from legislators or voters. What's your position on the statewide ballot proposals?
I haven't taken any because, in fact, they're ballot proposals that were done through petitions. And as you know, the legislature had voted on one of the initiatives, and our Constitution provides for that. So I haven't weighed in on the WOOP issue other than I did support the legislation when it first passed. And I would continue to support that because in terms of the Natural Resources Commission making decisions, it's not just arbitrary decision making. It needs to be based on science. And I think it's very good that we're actually making it less political. Because the goal that we used to have the situation is the legislature would make those decisions on seasons and different things like that. I thought it was good to move it to the Natural Resources Commission that, again, they tend not to be a partisan political body. Again, they are appointed by the governor over time, but their track record's good, and the legislation talked about using sound scientific principles for making decisions. And so I'm a believer in using science to decide what's appropriate hunting, how it should be done, the right seasons to do it. So the general concept of what we have in legislation, what they support, I'm supportive of. Again, what people want to do on the ballot, that our Constitution provides for people doing petitions, for the legislature to review them, and they don't ask the governor's opinion on those.
As a taxpayer and voter yourself, do you have a personal position?
In terms of weighing in on wolves in a great degree, I'm spending more time on trying to help people get a job. And I don't want to minimize that issue, but you have to set your priorities.
What do you consider your major accomplishments as governor during your first term? I'm just big long list.
There you go. How much time do you have?
Where's Tim?
Well, I'm serious. I know this is for you. I didn't plan on using it, but since you asked, if you look at it, there's a number of significant ones. I mean, if you stop and look at it, what we've done is really improve our climate for job creation in this state. Getting rid of the Michigan business tax, it was the dumbest tax in the United States. It was a job killer. We've done regulatory reform with that. We've created nearly 300,000 private sector jobs in terms of creating an environment for free enterprise to work. That's very significant. If you continue looking at major accomplishments like that, you can go on to one thing I'm really proud of is Healthy Michigan. Here's a situation where we've exceeded our expectations by a significant margin. It's been up since April 1. We have over 400,000. The number was about 405,000 lower income but hardworking Michiganders now getting health care that otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. It's saving lives. It's giving people an opportunity to have a family and a life. That's a huge accomplishment. In terms of reforms, I'm really proud of what we've invested in education. We've become a no-wait state for preschool. I just came from an early childhood center in Waterford. It's fabulous to see what's going on. In terms of, we had 29,000 kids that couldn't go to preschool when I took office. They can go now. Detroit. How many people thought you'd be hearing as many positive things and all the great things going on in Detroit? How many decades did we live through just hearing more negative stories? Now the narrative is primarily positive in terms of streetlights going up, trash being picked up, improved public safety, M1, the arena project. The list goes on. Warren Buffett talking about wanting to invest in Detroit, getting the grand bargain done, being on the path to hopefully emerge from bankruptcy in a couple months in a much stronger city, again, with the mayor and city council running the city with appropriate oversight and a much reduced debt load and more efficient operations. I'm proud of the role I played in that, and I had to make probably some of the toughest decisions people would have looked at in the entire United States in the last few years. And it's not only about helping Midtown and downtown. A lot of these programs, I'll be happy to go into as much detail as you like, are also aimed at the neighborhoods because I'm concerned that we can't leave the neighborhoods behind. And then we're working hard on other communities. I'm proud of what we've done in public safety in Detroit, Flint, Pontiac, and Saginaw with our Secure City Partnership. We've seen double-digit decreases in violent crime in these communities because it's engaging the whole community now. So the list goes on. I mean, we've gotten a lot done. Good government, we've balanced budgets now.
How far down have you gotten in this list?
Not very far. It's actually a pretty small font. That's my problem, is I can't get old enough where it's hard to read that font size.
Well, this is, being governor of the state of Michigan is your first political office, and it's fair to, after the list of accomplishments, it's also fair to ask you what would you consider would be your biggest mistakes you've made in the last 4 years?
Well, you learn a lot. In terms of some of the political ones, one mistake we did was when we did the Nerd Fund, for example. We didn't initially set up to disclose donors. We've done that since that time, but that was a case where we're following all the law. I got good advice. They said this is how you do it. In retrospect, I should have gotten even better advice because that created an issue that really is not an issue, but it was an issue of where people could see a concern. So that's one thing I learned that, again, I hadn't been through that process before. There are other cases where when you look at legislation and such, are there better steps you could have had that are challenging to get done? But overall, I'm pretty proud of the track record. And it's not just what I've done, it's because it's a team. I mean, my partners in the legislature have been good, the whole environment, and I've tried to be a good partner with local government and the federal government.
Switching back, obviously, to the political season, the political race, you've been endorsed by former moderate Republican Governor Bill Milliken, who's also endorsed Democrats Gary Peters and Mark Cotton for U.S. Senate and Attorney General. Your thoughts on picking up endorsements from that particular candidate?
I've always looked up to Governor Milliken. That was the first campaign I ever worked on. It was his campaign in 1974. And he's one of the governors I looked at as a good role model, because if you look at what he did, particularly on environmental issues, some of the other critical issues, protecting the Great Lakes, and what he did in Detroit. If you look back in history and you ask who were governors, regardless of party, that really tried to be a great partner to help the city during difficult times, he would be the name that comes up most often. So, again, I've used him as a role model. I've had other good role models. And I appreciate his endorsement. I'm thankful for that. He's a great person.
Yesterday Mitt Romney was in town and there was a Republican rally with the other statewide Republicans on the ballot. Why don't you campaign?
I was saying thank you to a lot of MDOT employees, Michigan Department of Transportation employees, county employees, DNR people for doing wonderful work during the floods. They went above and beyond to help people, and that was previously scheduled. And I think it's important to say thank you for all the support, not just for the flood, but if you think about it, many of those groups, not just MDOT, but the county, if we had a record winter, that was not good. We had a record flood. You go through this list, it was like, I mean, one of the comments is, are we waiting for locusts to show up? The good part is that's not a real issue, but we had the bridge that got knocked down on the freeway. So we've had a lot of challenges this last year, and it's important to recognize hardworking people. I'm not the best politician in the world. I want to be a great governor.
All right. Well, back in 2012, the poll numbers took a big dip after Michigan legislature passed right to work in the lame duck session. How do you think that's affected your re-election prospects?
Well, 2 or 3 things on right to work. I mean, to put it in context, and the poll numbers. I don't govern by poll numbers. And I've had 2 or 3 ups and downs, beginning with my first budget. Because everybody wanted me to change things, and when you start changing things, some people, had concerns about it. Right to work, to put it in perspective, because originally I said it wasn't on my agenda because it was too divisive an issue. And I firmly believe that, and I stuck to that until really summertime of 2012. I did a meeting with a management labor council, the management labor council in the state. And I said, I'm really concerned that we're going to have a divisive environment over labor issues in our state. And I said, the catalyst, the trigger to cause all this to happen is going to be Proposal 2. There was a petition drive on to put what became Proposal 2 on the ballot, which was collective bargaining that would have destroyed Michigan's economy. And so publicly, with both management and labor present, I said, I want to avoid this divisive environment because you'll see right to work, you'll see collective bargaining, you got all this stuff otherwise that are going to be on the table. Please don't go forward with this petition drive. And if you go forward with this petition drive, you're going to create this environment where you're going to see all this, and then those issues are going to be on the table. They ignored me. They went forward with it. The petition drive was successful. It got voted down resoundingly by our citizens. And then right to work was an issue. We had a divisive environment, and we won. I'd been out there that I supported right to work. I never made an issue of it, but it's a smart thing to do. And why do I say that? Because it's standing up for Michigan workers. People in the state work hard for their money. And shouldn't they have the choice to say they want to belong to a union or not? And unions should be presenting the best value proposition. Because again, if someone sees value in joining a union, they should join. They should be happy to pay those dues. If they don't see value, should they be forced to pay? I think, if anything, it should allow the unions to be more responsive to their potential members by saying they have to put something together to say it's worth spending the money for. So I viewed it as I was standing up for, I don't work for the unions, I work for the citizens. I was hardworking folk, and I was standing up for them. The other thing that we have seen positive consequences is it's really increased our business development pipeline in the state. We've seen a lot more companies interested in Michigan that before we were just getting thrown off the radar. They wouldn't even seriously look at Michigan. And now we've seen a major increase in our pipeline. And that will lead to more and better jobs to employ more Michigan workers. So I think it was a good outcome. Again, it was a divisive environment, but I'm not the one that's flipped the switch to say, let's create that. I encourage people to avoid it.
There's a number of things in the legislature that stalled, kind of stalled. As we kind of in the political season. It's been an even year. We're going to have another lame duck session in the legislature. What would you like to see come out of that? Are there priorities that you have for the lame duck session?
Well, the big priority is transportation package, a comprehensive solution. Again, I don't want to see a lot of strange things come out of lame duck because that's a concern you get sometimes. But in terms of major things, one of the major accomplishments that we haven't fully gotten done is transportation funding. And it was really a question of being an election season. This being an election year, it became too difficult for legislators. The good part is I believe the public was being very supportive. That was actually helping drive the movement to happen. I've been calling for this for 2 or 3 years, as you know. Until this year's pothole season, it didn't have enough public support. This year's pothole season brought it home. And I still remind people of that. I like to ask people in a session, who here knows someone that either had a blown tire or bent rim? And you'll see a lot of hands go up. And the point is, should we be spending money on that? Or wouldn't it have been better to save that money and actually have better roads so you wouldn't have that problem to begin with? So the good part is that we're on a path to do that, but it was too close to an election for some legislators to get on board with it. We made progress, though. Action happened in both chambers, bipartisan action. So I think there's a framework to get something done, and I hope that's the top priority when done.
Kind of related to that, there was some movement, at least initially, on no-fault insurance reform. Would that be another lame duck priority of yours, or is that just quietly?
No, I think actually I'm trying to get feedback from legislators to see what they think could be appropriate. What I would say is my top priority, the biggest thing, and the one thing I'd really like to get done is transportation reform. That would be a huge accomplishment. Because again, let's put it in context. This is every 10 to 20 years something happens. The last time was 97. So when people say, well, nothing got done, well, actually getting the legislature to take up bills, to get chambers to change bills back and forth, there's a lot of positive progress. It takes some time. Let's wrap it up and link up.
You had mentioned a little earlier in the conversation that you're proud of Healthy Michigan.
Yeah.
That was actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was actually expansion of Medicaid required as part of the monitor, is it not?
Yeah, to put it in context, it was not required. It was actually, originally it was under the law, but then the Supreme Court made it. But I would say, let me step back on the whole Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act does not solve our future in healthcare. There's a lot of problems with the Affordable Care Act. I wouldn't have done it that way, but it got done. And in that context then I view the Affordable Care Act as one of the most polarizing issues in our country. People have strong feelings, and it tends to be either you hate the whole thing or you love the whole thing. As governor, that's not my job to love or hate something in the whole. My job is to do what's best for the citizens of our state. And so I looked at the whole piece of legislation, and within that, there are some other positives dealing with pre-existing conditions. There are some good things that were included in it. But one part that sort of stood there was the issue about Medicaid expansion. Because there are a lot of hardworking but lower-income people that don't have health care, as I said earlier. On the face of it, Medicaid expansion The federal way didn't make sense to me. But what we did is we went and got permission to modify it to put more personal responsibility and more emphasis on wellness on the front end. Because I'm a huge wellness believer. We need to take more responsibility for our own health. We could solve our healthcare problem in this country if we fully did. Each one of us could. We made those modifications, came up with Healthy Michigan. That was a big bipartisan project. As you know, I campaigned most of last year on it during the summertime, and we got it done. We launched April 1, and to give you some idea in size and magnitude, I mentioned the number. Our first year goal was 320,000 people with an estimated max of 470. We've passed the 400,000 citizen mark, and we started April 1 without a hiccup. We've actually had the system work so well as compared to the federal exchange at the higher level that we've had people apply, get approved, and get service in the same day. And that's awesome. That's the way customer service government should happen.
We've kind of neglected our manners, Governor. Would you like some water? Or
I'll take a water, please. Little horse. I was reading books to preschool kids earlier, so I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, let me take that.
No, that's fine. You can keep going. I'll just take a sip.
Great. Got kind of a broad boilerplate question that you've probably been asked. You were asked probably multiple times 4 years ago, but you know, why are you the better candidate for governor than Mike Shower, and why should voters give you a second vote?
Yeah. Well, as you know before, I don't say negative things about other people. What I would say is why I believe I should continue being governor is I think I've been a good governor. If you look back at what was our state, we had a broken state. Sometimes we forget that we were the most messed up state in the United States. Our young people were leaving. We had the highest unemployment in the nation. So if you go and look at what's happened is I came in basically saying we need to reinvent our state, which means you have to do a lot of tough things. I said a lot of them. If you look at that list, you can see we've accomplished far more than most traditional state governments would accomplish in a 4-year period. And we've done a lot of great things, that everything from economic growth, nearly 300,000 private sector jobs being created, personal incomes coming back strong, home values. We had the largest increase in home values in the United States in the last 12 months or so. We're keeping our young people here. We're growing. We addressed Detroit, a situation that we know has been a major challenge for 40 or 50 years. And we're seeing a positive outcome. Warren Buffett talking about investing in Detroit. Most people never thought they'd see that in their lifetime. So if you look at it, those are great accomplishments, but I shouldn't just get reelected because of that. I think I have a vision for the future that's exciting. It's to continue on, more and better jobs, with the huge issue being helping people get career connected, particularly in the skilled trades. We broke our system in this country where we did a smart thing saying we needed more training, but we created a path which basically only emphasized getting a university degree. And I'm never going to discourage people from doing that, but we needed to have that. We broke that second track, which is there should be a second equally important, equally honorable track that emphasizes becoming a skilled tradesperson through career tech education. And when I say skilled trades, if you're in manufacturing today, you're a skilled tradesperson. If you're in agriculture, you're a skilled tradesperson. So almost most positions are skilled trade jobs today. So we need that track created, and we've already started with a program called MAT Squared, Michigan Advanced Technician Training. It's the German apprenticeship model in Michigan. But I want to see that grow to thousands of people. We have tens of thousands of jobs to fill that are great middle-class jobs. That's how you bring an economy back. That's my top priority. Second priority is continuing with P20, prenatal through lifelong learning, in terms of improving our educational system. Again, we've led the nation in preschool. No state is even close in dollars or percentages to make us a no-wait state. We've been investing in K-12 in terms of dollars, but we need more student growth. I really want to emphasize third grade reading as an important metric. It's already there, but we need to reinforce that. We need to do something about educational costs for higher ed, continuing education. And we need to be innovative there. So I want to do more work with our universities, our community colleges, but I also want to encourage more dual enrollment. I just got my associate's degree last week. That was really cool. I'm very proud of that. Kellogg Community College. Because it really emphasizes, when I was there, dual enrollment, because they have 1,200 students in Battle Creek in this program. If you can get a year of college done while you're still in high school, you've saved 25% on a bachelor's degree, 50% on an associate's degree. Awesome. And the third priority is good government. When I took office, 2 of the 3 years we had budget shutdowns. When I took office, we had $2 million in a rainy day fund. And did anyone have a clue as to what our long-term liabilities were, let alone were we doing appropriate payments? No. So what have we done in the last few years? We did the fastest budgets in the last 30 years, structurally sound, balanced the way they should be. We've got over $500 million in our rainy day fund or savings account. And I'm not a career politician, so I don't believe in just looking at 1 year. We do 50-year forecasts because I want to make sure our kids and our kids' kids have a future in Michigan. And I can tell you, if you want a cool job in Michigan, you should run for governor in 2038. In 2038, we're going to have essentially the equivalent of our mortgage burning party because that's the payment plan I put in place to pay down our huge long-term liabilities for retirement and post-retiree medical. And isn't it cool to know that there's a payment plan in place? Those are the kind of things that need to continue and need to stick and need to be part of a long-term foundation for success, because that's what this is about. What got me fired up to run was my wife. When we talked about it, it's like we've got 3 kids. They're now college age or just out of college. We want them to have a future in the state, along with all these other kids that were being forced to leave or not having opportunities. Those opportunities need to be there.
Sorry, did you say you just got your associate's?
I did.
In what?
In arts. I got my, because basically what happened is everyone knows I'm a nerd. So you put it in context, and why was I a nerd? Why did that reputation come? I got my bachelor's when I was 19, my MBA when I was 20, and my law degree when I was 23, and I was an adjunct professor when I was 24 in Michigan's MBA program. What most people don't know is I started college when I was a junior in high school. I went to my mom and asked if I could start taking community college classes at Kellogg Community College. So between my junior year and the first half of my senior year, I earned 25 credit hours of community college. And so I was always proud of that. I'm a huge believer in community colleges. I wouldn't be here but for that. And so they finally, a few years ago, they came up with a reverse transfer agreement. There was some legislation done before I got in office to say, if you've got credits later, you can transfer those back. So basically, it was nice. KCC took hours from the U of M. They reviewed them and thought they were okay, and so I got my associate's degree.
Yeah. Well,
So I encourage more people to do that because it's supporting community colleges.
I've kind of been hogging questions here. I think I'd like to open it up.
I have one question. The city of Pontiac, as you know, has had its share of troubles. How do you view its progress under the emergency manager system? And now that the emergency manager is retired, how's it been going under the transition management system?
Well, it's been working. I mean, Pontiac was a very challenged community for decades, much like Detroit. It just wasn't as large and didn't get as much attention. But the issue was Pontiac had serious issues. And that's, I think, another illustration where the emergency manager law worked appropriately. Because my goal is I never want to do an emergency manager, but if there truly is an emergency, and those are objectively, there's objective criteria to do that, that's not subjective. And we need to come in and do it. My view is come in, do your job, get done, and get out, and get it back to the community. So we've done that in Pontiac, just leaving Allen Park. We've done it successfully in Benton Harbor. So, and Detroit's on the path to be there. Again, we've scaled that back already. Pontiac got through the process. I think it's coming along. I think there's some real opportunity in Pontiac. The other things we've tried to do in Pontiac in particular is we've done a lot of work with public safety. Again, partnering with the Oakland County Sheriff's Department. I appreciate Sheriff Bouchard's efforts there. But the Michigan State Police have been helpful. Again, bringing the community together. I think there's some good economic development opportunities in Pontiac. Pontiac should be a place that has a lot of upside. Being in the center of Oakland County is a place, is a natural to say you've got a downtown that should be able to be developed and do something to help in the neighborhoods. So we're working hard on programs there.
Technology is a big issue. You're a technology guy. You're a word nerd. You know, fiber optic cable, Google goes to Kansas City, wires it. There's incredible job growth, entrepreneurial jobs, small places. what's your thought about, like, you're talking about Pontiac. Pontiac could be a place where that could be an experiment, where you could wire the whole town with fiber optics, and it might draw the kind of entrepreneurs that would sort of drive, low level of job growth that could grow into the Quicken Loans of the world. So what kind of investment do you think it would take, and where do you think that might work, and how do you do it?
Yeah, there's a balancing act to that. And again, it's really, you have finite resources. So having better connectivity, bandwidth, fiber, and associated things, to do it in a massive scale probably is not a cost-efficient answer. What it's best at is finding a localized area where you can really create that cluster of entrepreneurship and innovation. I'll give you an illustration, like in Detroit, the Madisonville. What's going on there? It's great to have, and I don't know if they do or they don't, but to have the best connectivity to a place like that, but to have it 2 miles away today wouldn't probably change the needle that much, given the cost structures, versus saying, how do you create it there and how do you do other centers? So it's really being focused on where there's an opportunity to really create that center of activity, that placemaking opportunity. One thing on bandwidth we do need to work is there's a lot of rural parts of Michigan we can improve. And I view that as a priority, both for cell service and for broadband. Because one nice part about, we can leverage that one, is some of our more smaller communities that are farther out in Michigan, there's opportunities for them to really do call centers, tech centers, different things, because you don't need to be physically in one location. They can be distributed activities, and we can leverage that. One great thing that we have in Michigan that very few people recognize is the Merit Network. The Merit Network is a consortium of the research universities going back to the DARPANET days, before it was called the Internet. And those universities were original members, and so we created sort of a hardware backbone within the state that connects a lot of our schools and a lot of our communities, and there's a way to still use that as one of the hub activities to really create these centers, and we have been working.
Does that hold any promise for a city like Pontiac?
I think it can. I mean, again, this is where it's not, the connectivity part is part of the equation, but it's that placemaking element. Young professionals in particular, want to be in that downtown environment. And you can see it in multiple places. Again, Detroit, I mean, people know the occupancy rate's 95%. They need more housing now because there's not space. But there are a lot of other communities. Ann Arbor's been known for that for some time. Grand Rapids is doing very well in terms of that environment. Royal Oak, though, I mean, some of the other communities, they're known for a hotspot for these kind of activities. Pontiac is a place that we need to create the placemaking environment in terms of, that attraction. Another community that I'd cite that most people wouldn't put on your list, but I'm really proud of them because I think they're doing a great job, is Jackson. Jackson came up with a program called Anchors Away, and they have a goal to have 300 young people living in downtown Jackson in the next few years. 300 people living in downtown Jackson dramatically changes the whole climate of the community. So when you get issues like Pontiac and these other places, the way I view it is, as governor of the state, my role is not necessarily to go tell anyone they should be that place. My role is to be that supportive partner and to really encourage that environment for innovation and entrepreneurship to come up from the local community, and then create the encouragement to say, here are programs to encourage you to do that. And if you look, we've done a lot of best practice incentives. We've put a lot of things out there to encourage that. And when we find communities that are ready, because the community wants to do it, I want to be there to say, okay, we're going to be a supportive partner. And as you succeed, you can be a role model, because other people will look around and say, well, I want to be like you too. And we're all unique, so it has to have its own unique flavor, but then they can jump on the same program. So what I'm trying to do is foster entrepreneurship and innovation among communities and regions within the state. I don't want to be the guy saying we're from the state and we're here to help. That's not, right?
I've always had the most positive connotation.
4 years ago, you said you were going to govern in dog years. Certainly had a pretty brisk.
Yeah.
Hey, so are you campaigning in dog years?
Yeah. I'm happy. We did just in Troy last night at Town Hall, and we did one in Kalamazoo earlier this week. And I love town halls because it's really hearing from my the citizens who I work for. And so I appreciate that. I learned from them. And it's much like, Charlie, to give you credit, I mean, you asked me that one question that now I have something else that I'm happy to add on my list. When that woman asked about, you know, the fraud, the doctor case, and mentioned certain bills. Again, there are a lot of bills out there, but it hadn't come to my attention yet. Now I've got something I can add to my list that raises awareness. And it'll be interesting that other people may speak up now, and you can see, you know, how it lines up.
I think credentialing for professionals generally is an issue. And I know that that's true also in education. You know, it's hard to discipline teachers and to, you know, have that follow them so they can't just leave one district and go to another. And, you know, people don't know.
Right.
Opportunity.
Yeah.
Have those things follow. You know, obviously people make mistakes and don't want that to be a millstone around their neck. At the same time, if they're still offending or doing whatever it is that got them in trouble in the first place, you know, and just pick up and move to the next town and pick up all.
No, it's important. And I know that personally because, again, I'm licensed as both a CPA and an attorney. So you appreciate, and because, again, you want a high standard of all those things. We actually find that in the regulatory scheme out diverge from it, but it's really important because quite often we'll find communities or groups actually want regulation. This is something that people don't realize because they want to make sure things are safe in terms of standards. So that is an appropriate thing done within reasonable constraints. But the best one beyond just professional credentials would be, say, the milk industry. The milk industry is very adamant about wanting to make sure they have good inspections, they have tough inspections, because the last thing you want is, if you think about it, a food safety issue, if there's one problem, people may not buy anything. And so this is the point about professional credentials, but particularly in agriculture and food safety, we have it's a comparable area with the same kind of perspective where regulations is almost critical to be successful in terms of giving consumers confidence.
Just a quick question, Governor. Two quick questions. This is something I learned from a recent experience when I got into a small car accident. When I went through the insurance and everything, I learned a lot of things. And one thing in particular that I heard people talking about, and they were not happy with the no-fault insurance thing, where if someone is in a car accident and they don't have the appropriate insurance, and if they got rear-ended by someone, they don't necessarily are bound by the law to compensate them for the loss and everything. So I just want to know how do you explain that, what you're saying on it? And secondly, what are your plans to make sure that Michigan doesn't get as cold as it did last year? If you can stop that, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll take the second one first, beyond my pay grade.
Okay.
Yeah, so I always, whenever I do a town hall or this forum, ask anything you want, but basically some I'm just going to pass on. So I'm going to pass on that and Michigan football. So don't bother asking anything on Michigan football. There's there's no upside to having those discussions. On the whole issue of auto insurance in our state, it's more expensive than I'd like it to be, particularly in some urban areas. And we need to continue working that issue, and there are two or three pieces to it. One is there's still an auto fraud issue. We were talking about fraud earlier, and we need to work on it. On no fault, I still think there are some reasonable reforms that we should be looking at because that cost continues to accelerate. You still have some rights that go against those folks, but you have to go sue them, and they may not have the resources, so that doesn't help you a whole lot. What I would say is it's more some of the cost constraints. If you look in terms of how we do things, because I want to be sensitive to people that get injured. So when I talk about no fault, it's that balancing act of consumer costs versus making sure we're taking care of the medical needs of people that are injured. That's a discussion we started, but it is something that, whether it's lame duck or the next term, those are things we probably should continue a discussion on because we can do better.
I never thought I'd say this, but I'm out of questions.
But that's always one of my goals, is I want to make sure, because again, think of that. How often do you go meet people? Career politicians keep you going a long time. If you ask me a question, I want to give you a straight answer, and that's how I try to operate.
I'm just curious on a personal level. You know, you're not a career politician. You've talked about that a lot, and people know that about you. And nationally, that's sort of a reputation. Do you see other business leaders, CEO types, business owners on the level that you were actually thinking about, you as a role model to do that as well? Because that's, you talk about we're talking about customer service, same day, you apply, you do it, and you get your service. I think that's how we all think government should work, but that's not how it works. So I guess the question is, people call you up and say, so talk me through this. Is this something, how's your experience?
Yeah, no, I actually am, hopefully will be a role model for that. And I think I am in some cases. I've had those discussions with people. A couple things I always try to emphasize to them. I said a couple levels are, one is don't be discouraged from public service if it's not an elected official. Because in most of the positions are actually appointed or other opportunities like that. The elected official, the threshold for the public scrutiny is really high. You still have more than any private sector thing if you're an appointed official, but it's probably a fraction of the elected official level. And in many cases, it's recruiting great people to be department heads, in departments, in areas, and that can be at any local, national level. So I'm trying to encourage more people to do that, because if you think about it, hopefully I'm in the prime of my career. And the point is I'm sure you could find some people that would disagree with that. But if you think about something, you're in your 50s, and you've got now 20 or 30 years of experience. So hopefully you've learned a lot from that experience, regardless of what it is. And then you still have the energy to keep going for a long time, to be innovative, coming up with ideas. So I really want to encourage more people to look at public service. The hardest single thing I have to overcome when I talk to people today, though, are, for example, the ads. I mean, it's really hard to get somebody encouraged to run for office when people are just going to lie about what they've done or who they are. And so that makes it more difficult. So this is the hardest season for me to talk to somebody about that. But longer term, again, that's where I hope we raise that standard and bar of what's acceptable and what's good.
When you look around the country, I think you mentioned earlier, we really consider a lot of best practices, something businesses do, right? Somebody's figured out a way to do something, and they figured out a streamlined way that's, they turn on your investment of time, money, and everything else, count. If you look around the country, are there states that are doing particular things that you really like the citizens initiative to look hard at?
Well, I have. We've actually taken some of those ideas. I mean, if you look at places, a couple places I benchmark in particular, one was Indiana. If you look at the history there, Mitch Daniels was one of the best governors in our country. I mean, he did a great job, and he did a lot of good things. I'll tell you one interesting story that people don't realize, that it was the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. And so they have become a role model for people looking at how to set things up. The funny part is the Indiana Economic Development was actually modeled after the MEDC originally. I was the first chair of the MEDC when it was created back in the late 90s. And we were a leader. They came and took our idea, and we messed up, and they made it better. So it sort of went full cycle. And I went down and benchmarked. I met with Governor Daniels, and he was kind enough, recognizing that part of my goal was to have Michigan catch up and pass Indiana, to spend time. Well, again, governors are good about that, because we all want to be better, and we want to help each other be better. And that's not a party thing. I mean, the nice part about most governors, you can call them up, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, and they'll be pretty good about helping a fellow governor. And that's the kind of thing you like to see in the political world. So Indiana was a role model. Utah was a role model. In fact, we went out and recruited John Nixon to be state budget director, because he was the best budget director in the country. And we got him to come here, and he did a lot of great work. It's only because Utah came back, University of Utah came back with a dream job for him, that we lost it. And I appreciate that. That was a lot of family issues. So that's where it's exciting to see, the opportunities to learn and do things. And I think Michigan has such a great opportunity in front of us. And that's where I view November, is I don't view it as simply looking at a candidate's, my name on the ballot or a candidate's name. Do people want to go back to 2009 with the politics and the broken system of how things used to work back then, or do we want to continue on? We've come back a long way. We still have people struggling, but we've come back a long way. Let's continue on the path to really make sure it lasts. And we do it for people today, but also finish up this foundation for our kids and our kids' kids, and that, 50-year plus forecast I talked about. Well, that's the way government should be. I mean, people do laugh when I say that, but isn't that the way we should do it?
The image when you said that, the image that popped in my mind was the mortgage abundance part of it.
Yeah.
Some of us are getting close to it, looking forward to
Yeah.
that day, and we can throw it in the fireplace.
Yeah.
So, but just that.
That's great.
The President of the Public. Yes, I think we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on 2016 presidential race? Anybody you'd like to see run?
No, I've got 30 some days of looking at for an election in November. Well, thanks. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, appreciate you coming in.